Hey guys, welcome to the fourth video where we're gonna start working on the details for the Thing or Ben Grimm from the Fantastic Four. Let's go ahead and jump straight in. All right, so here is where we left off from ZBrush, and as you can see, we have all the, let's say the stylized anatomy, refine and define, and we have some of the polished surface. All of these things are still separate objects, so I have the, if I go into solo mode, we have the arms separately, we have the rest of the body separately, the head and the jaw as well. Now, for the final render, if I go back to my scene here in Marmoset, I still have all the separate objects. So again, this is a separate software. I'm gonna talk about this in the last video of the series. But if I go ahead and hide everything, you'll see I still I still have all the different objects that I have in ZBrush. So I didn't have to actually combine them all together in a sense that I have a single object. Everything remains a separate object, and this just makes it a lot easier to manipulate and to adjust things if I wanted to. But if you want to, you can go ahead and check out the previous video when I show you how to combine different objects like the arms and create a single object. Now, just because I get this question quite a bit, I'm going to briefly cover if in case you want to have this in a single object, which you can totally do it, right? So what I want to do is at this point that I have this mesh in the highest resolution, right? Or all the objects are in the highest resolution. I'm going to go ahead and clean this up a little bit so it's the only one displaying. And I'm going to go ahead and click on Merge Visible. So if I click on this one, ZBrush is going to go ahead and look at everything that is visible in my subtool list, right? And it's going to create a brand new tool, right? And this tool, as you can see, is a single object and it has all my subdivision levels, which is great. Now, I probably don't want to have the eyes in the same subtool just because I might want to have a different material, and it's going to make it a lot easier if I can split this into separate objects based on the material. So what you can do is this still has all the polygroups, so I can go ahead and split this. Let's go make sure that you are in the lowest subdivision level, and I have it here in my UI because I use it all the time. This one right here, the split hidden. But if you go to your subtool list, you can go to the split section, click on split hidden, and that should split the hidden objects. So now we have the eyes in a separate subtool, and we have the rest of the body in a separate subtool. Now, this body still has all the objects, so the arms are separate from the rest of the body and so on. Now, if you want to have this as a single object, like literally that there is no dividing line here, you can actually blend these two together. You can actually do that. So the easiest thing to do will be to go to the gizmo. You won't be able to apply this unless you remove the subdivision level. So I'm going to delete lower, and that way we basically lost all the subdivision level, but that's fine. I'm going to click on the gear icon here, go to remesh by union, and this is going to do the same process that I showed you before. It's going to combine anything and make like a watertight mesh. Let's click on accept. And if I go ahead and hide these or portions of it, or a portion of it, the inside, you'll see there's no intersection of the mesh. Now this one right here, it's fine. There's a tiny bit here that might be a bit problematic, like a little pocket of air, but it's just because the arm is very close to the body. So in fact, I can just go back a little bit now that I saw that and fix it by simply going to the lowest subdivision level. And I'm going to isolate this, and I'm going to use my move brush just to push this in just a little bit. Let's do that in this angle. All right, so that's a little bit better. And I forgot to do it on the other side, but that's no problem. Let's go ahead and go back to the high subdivision level, delete lower, and I'm going to mirror and well, so I have the same sort of effect on both sides. All right, so this is just a little fix. Let's go ahead and bring in the gizmo. So to repeat the process, gear icon, go to the remesh by union. And again, this is going to create a watertight mesh, and let's accept that. And if I look inside the model, that's a little bit cleaner. All right, so this is a single mesh now. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to save a state of this model in the undo history. So I'm going to ask ZBrush to please remember the current state of this model at this resolution and at this level. And then I'm going to do a series measure and project the details based on that history point or recall point that we saved in the history. So I'm going to go ahead and hold Control and click on that. And you'll see that the history line here, or the undo history, has a white little line on top or over the orange one. And that means that we have recorded this current state. Now I'm going to enable symmetry to make sure that I do this symmetrically. And I'm going to take the target polygon count to 6,000. In previous videos, I showed you how to do this. So I'm just going to go a little bit faster. And again, I'm using my current UI, but let's go ahead and click on See Remesher. And there we go. So this basically creates a brand new mesh, right? But of course, we don't have any of those details or any of that nicely defined and polished surface. So what we need to do is divide the mesh a few times until we get something that is cleaner. And in order to recover those lines and that definition of the anatomy, look at the face, how smooth it is right now. I'm going to go ahead and project from history. So you see the orange line right now in the undo history is indicating that this is where we're currently at, or this is the current state of the model. But because we saved the history, or we saved this point in the time or in the history of this model, we will be able to recall this and project that information back into the current state of the mesh. So if that sounds a little bit confusing, don't worry. All I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that in the project subtab, so let's go to the subtool list or subtool panel in here. I'm going to go ahead and open up the project subtab, and we have this project all and project undo history or history. So this is the one that I'm going to use, but I'm not going to project the color. So I'm going to turn the color off, and I'm only going to project the geometry. So I'm going to click on project history. ZBrush is going to look at that point, and it's going to push all those details that we had from the previous point that we saved into the current one. So we now have a pretty decent mesh, but the difference now is that if I go into subdivision levels, you see everything is a single mesh. So this is something that you can totally do. And one thing that is pretty cool about this is, if we go, let's say, to subdivision level, subdivision level 3, we can go ahead and smooth this out a little bit, even subdivision level 2, so it's a little bit faster. We can smooth this out, so the transition between, let's say, the deltoid, the trapezius here in the back, the pectoral muscles and all of that, it's a little bit smoother, right? If that's something that you want to go for. And you can also, let's say, fix how the neck muscle, feel this area, or kind of like integrate with the rest of the pectoral. So if I bring in my clay brush, I can go ahead and do something like this, smooth things out, and that may, it might look a little bit more natural. But like I said, just because of the nature of this concept, if I go back to my final one in Marmoset, like I said, because of the nature of this model, the fact that it's going to have all these high frequency details and the surface noise of these rocks is going to allow me to play around with these shapes a little bit more, and it's kind of like hard to see where the division is, right? So that's why I didn't worry too much about turning it into one single mesh, but I wanted to give you the option in case you're doing something different, something that doesn't have this pattern. All right, so with this out of the way, let's go ahead and jump back to the one that I actually use for the render that has all the different objects. And the way that I'm going to add details to this project is going to be with a very simple approach using the surface noise. So I went ahead and created a tileable texture. So this is Photoshop, and this is a very simple tileable texture. You can check if it is tileable by clicking on the view and then going to the pattern preview here in Photoshop. And you see it is just a texture that is tileable and is black and white. And it's a grayscale texture. All right. So the cool thing about the grayscale texture, again, this is how things work in ZBrush. Anything that is white or gets closer to the white color, the pure white, is going to be the areas that are going to push outside of the surface, and anything that is darker or closer to a black color is going to push inside the surface. Right. So with this, we will be able to create a bit of depth without much work, just by using this texture. And this is literally what I use to generate all of this. You might even recognize the pattern already in the surface. So I'm going to show you how this is done and how to approach this because it requires a couple of steps, but it's really, really simple. So I'm going to concentrate on maybe something like the body, right? And all we need to do for this to work is to use the surface noise. So let's go ahead and open up this section of the tool palette. So I'm going to collapse a few before this gets too out of hand. And this one right here called the surface. So that is when we applied the surface noise. So I'm going to click on noise. This is going to allow me to add some noise to the mesh. But what I'm interested in is a specific noise. So not this generic sort of bumpy surface, which, it might be something useful or some useful effect that you want to add to it. But what I want to do is I want to project, or I want to add the image that I just showed you. So for that, I'm going to click on alpha, where it says on and off. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to go ahead and select this stylized crack that is the PSD file, right? And there you go. So now we have that image that I just showed you in Photoshop, and we just need to tweak a few things. So the first thing I want to do is I want to remove this noise, this random, very noisy texture. And that is with the mix basic noise. So I'm going to take that one and set it to 0. So now we're only seeing the effect of this noise roughly in here. So these cracks that you can sort of see here, that is what this is providing. So to change the size, we're just going to go to the alpha scale. Literally, this is the alpha, and we're going to reduce that, right? And because we're doing something very specific, obviously, it would be good to check some references, but I think something like this, or maybe even larger sort of rocks, would work just fine. Now, the other thing is that this is also, even though it is a black and white image, it is driving a mix or a blend of two colors. So if you don't want to have any information of the color just yet, you can click on this color blend and you can set this to 0. So now you have only the information of this alpha in terms of deforming or distorting the surface and the volume. So obviously this is not very strong. So what we can do is increase the strength slider. So I'm going to push this in. If I go to the positive values, is going to actually push the outlines, but that's not what we want. So I want to push the strength down, so to the negative values, something like this. So if I go for minus 0.2, you kind of like see the cracks or the lines. But if I go further than that, I will be able to do that, or I will be able to see the cracks as well as some slight deformation of each one of these rocks. So this is going to make it a lot easier. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. All right. So this looks great. And this is kind of like a good starting point to do the detailing. However, if I rotate around, you'll see that this is distorted and this looks really weird. So this is another question that I used to get in terms of detailing with this technique. And this is because what ZBrush is doing is taking a flat 2D image and is looking at the camera angle that you started with, or that you enabled the surface noise, and is projecting that image in that axis. So that means that all of these lines are just a projection of that 2D image. So this can be fixed quite easily. So let's go ahead and turn off the noise. All I need to do is generate some UVs. So my preferred method is to go to the lowest subdivision level, where I basically have these polygon or polygroup IDs, right? And I have done this already. You can go ahead and do it yourself. I'm just going to show you how it's done briefly. So let me just clone this. This is a little bit of a branching out. So I'm going to select this and I'm going to give it a single polygroup, right? So if you have an object that only has a polygroup, what you can do is use the select lasso. I'm going to turn off perspective and I'm going to rotate while holding the shift key to snap to one of the sides. I want to hold control and shift, and let's say you want to do something like this, right? So you hide part of your model and then you hold control and W. Of course, you can be more careful as to where you cut the model so that it is nice and neat of a line. But in this case, it doesn't really matter, and I'll show you why. We're going to use morph targets for this. So we now have two polygroups, right? And the idea is to hide or to create the difference between the polygroups IDs in areas that are not going to be visible. So with these two, I'm going to go to C plugin and I'm going to go to the UV master. And again, you need to make sure that you are in the lowest subdivision level of your mesh so that you can utilize this technique. So I'm going to make sure that symmetry is enabled. Polygroup is the most important one. This is the one that is going to tell ZBrush to look for the different polygon IDs that you have, or essentially the different colors that you have. And when you click unwrap, you will be able to unwrap these into two pieces. If you want to check what ZBrush does with the unwrapping to generate these UVs, you need to click on this morph UV, which this is again my custom UI, but you have it here under the UV map. You can click on this morph UV and you'll see that this is the 2D version of that 3D mesh, right? When I click on morph UV again, just to go back to what I had, and now we have these two polygroups. The difference between these and what I currently have, let's go back in here, is that I decided to divide this in 3 different polygroups just to simplify the process even more, and that probably gave me like a cleaner line between the polygroups. But because I already have that, I also have UVs that I generated exactly in the same way that I just showed you. And this is the important step, or the important thing to have in order for this to work. So let's push this all the way to the highest subdivision level. Let's go back to surface noise. Let's go into solo mode. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to click on edit surface and I'm going to change from 3D to UV. If you don't have UV maps, this option, this switch right here is going to be grayed out. It's going to be disabled. So you need to make sure that you have UVs. I'm going to do that, click on UV, and now everything is working nicely. Obviously, because this is a tileable texture and we created the seams for the UVs, this line is going to be pretty evident. So I'm going to show you a workaround that works pretty well to fix this type of things. So let's click on OK. And this is one of the best things about this entire process, that at this point, this is purely a preview. You haven't applied anything at all. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in a model that already has all of these applied to it. There we go. So I just basically went ahead and replicate the process that I just showed you on each one of the objects. So I have polygroups and I sort of like cut them in special areas or in specific areas. I also created the UVs, obviously. And now that I have UVs, I went ahead and added the noise. But all of this is a preview, so I can pre-visualize how everything is going to look. In fact, if I go closer to the edge, you'll see that this noise is actually not deforming the surface. It's kind of like a visual bump in a way, right? So if I turn this on and off, you see the volumes are not changing at all. So what I need to do is apply this so that I can start sculpting it. So I'm gonna do this with the arms just to show you what it means. So I'm gonna go ahead and click on Apply to Mesh. So this button right here is gonna take whatever I have in my surface noise and is going to apply it to the actual mesh. So you see now we have some deformation, right? And we might need a little bit more resolution, so I'm just gonna do that as well. But before I do that, I'm gonna show you the issue with this step. The issue is that because we have that line that goes through the seam or through the UV, we have some areas that look a little bit awful like this, right? So what I wanna do is save a morph target that allows me to erase or remove some of the areas that get distorted, and then I can manually fix this. So again, I'm gonna show you all the steps. Let's go back just to a step before I apply that noise to the mesh. And before I apply it, all I'm gonna do is store a morph target. Now, if you haven't used morph target before, they're a fantastic tool that allows you to go back to a previous state of the model in a very, very easy way. So this is something that I use all the time. That's why I have it here in my UI, store morph target. But if you haven't used it before, you can go to the morph target palette here, and you can go ahead and store a morph target. So this is similar to what I did before of storing a undo history. This is something that gets saved into the memory of ZBrush, so we can recall it at any point. All right, so with that out of the way, let's go back into the surface noise here, and I'm gonna apply it again, right? One thing that I forgot to do was to subdivide the model, so let me just do that actually. So I'm gonna undo a couple of times, so I got rid of the morph target. So let me do that again. I'm gonna subdivide this one more time. So we have about 1.5 million in just the arms. Now let's store the morph target. Let's apply the mesh or apply the noise to the mesh. And you see we have a nice sort of set of details. And these ones are actually deforming the geometry quite a bit, which is great. And now we can make use of the morph target to go back and fix some of these weird looking line that is the result of having different polygroups in these areas, right? So let's go ahead and do that. All I need to do is bring in my brush palette. Let's filter by the letter M. And let's find the morph, so BMG, so this one right here. So what the morph is going to do is going to allow me to erase this and going back to the previous state of the model. So I'm gonna start doing this, right? And I'm not gonna do it through the entire model, just a little bit, just to kind of like give you the idea of why I would do it this way. Something like this. So that obviously removes all of these details from this section, but that's kind of like the workaround or the compromise that you have to make. Right? So now that I have this, I can just go ahead and select something like the damp standard brush. If you want something a little bit stronger than the damp standard brush, you can use something like the HR Geiger cutter. This is from one of my packs that is just going to give you a stronger version. So if you're interested, I'm going to leave a link in the description of this video as well. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to start cutting things like so. Don't worry, this looks slightly different than the rest of it. You know what? Let's go back in time. I'm going to use something different, just so that it's consistent with the thickness of this gap. So instead of the HR Geiger cutter, I'm going to use the Beksiński standard strong. So these two are part of my tribute pack to Geiger and Beksiński. So I'm going to use the Alt key to push in, and I'm going to increase the intensity quite a bit more. So this is going to give me a similar result to that sort of crack. So at this point, all I'm going to do is manually continue the refinement of these details. And I'm doing this a little bit faster. I did spend a little bit more time with the actual render or the final render that I had. All right, something like that. But you get the idea. There's like certain areas that you will have to fix. Now, the next thing that I would do, again, I'm not going to do the entire thing, but hopefully you get the idea. It's just a bit more of the same. But the next thing that I'm going to do is click on the clay polish. So clicking on the clay polish is going to refine some of those edges a little bit more. And you see the effect is quite nice. You have this very simple but effective way of creating this type of rocks. Again, this is something that I applied only to this object, but once I apply this to the rest of the character, the effect will be a lot more visible. So let me go ahead and load up the next step, if you will, like the same step, but a little bit more precise and with more details. So this is kind of like the next thing. I'm going to go before and after. I'm going to show you a couple more things. So after you apply your noise pattern, like in this case, these rocks, you end up with something like this. So this one is applied a bit stronger. So maybe the arms are not as bad. So I'm going to select the body and just going to show you this. So if I apply this mesh as it is, you see it's not very strong. Let's in fact subdivide this one more time. Apply to mesh. So this one is not very strong compared to what I have here, right? So this one is the one that I actually use for the render. So this one is quite low. So what I can do is undo that, go to the noise pattern or editing that noise pattern, and I'm going to push the strain quite a bit. So this is like exaggerating it. I'm going to click OK. So that way, when I apply it to mesh, it's going to actually distort that surface a lot more. So this is kind of like what I use. All right. So just again to refine this a bit more or to reiterate the process, I'm going to go ahead and do the clay polish, clear the mask, and you see we have a very nice pattern with these rocks. Now, the difference between this state of the model and what I have here on mine is that I actually wanted to have a little indication of, let's say, where the abdominal muscles could be with like larger rocks, as you can see in here, and that sort of thing. So again, it works in the same way with the morph target. All I did was, before I apply this, so let's undo all of this, I saved a morph target. I applied this to the mesh. I ran the polish, just like I showed you. And then I use the morph target, so BMG, and I remove kind of like the center line or these areas. And then I use something like the clay brush that I also showed you before. And I'm going to press X to remove the symmetry. I will go ahead and do something like this. So just for the sake of demo, I'm going to do this very, very quickly so that you get the idea of the kind of like the step of the process. Not necessarily how thoroughly I would do it, but gives you the idea. Right? And then I'm just going to smooth some of these areas. And of course, we can refine kind of like the indentations of the cracks between all of these a bit more, right? So this is basically what I did with the final step that I showed you before. It's just that I spent a bit more time than just doing this the way that I'm doing it right now. All right. So hopefully this gives you the idea of what the step is all about. But if you spend some time and you do it more thoroughly, you get something like this. Now, the other thing I want to show you in terms of refining these details is that you can use something like the trim dynamic. So BTD, that is brush, then filtered by the T for trim, and then the D for dynamic. So the trim dynamic is a fantastic tool because it allows you to essentially trim this from different angles. So I'm going to take this one and I'm going to show you what I did. So I went ahead, this is a lot more manual, right? But I went through all of these rocks or the edges of these rocks and I trimmed them a little bit more just to add to the sense of the stylization that I was going for, right? So this helps me stylize things a little bit more, kind of like make it a bit more faceted, right? And once I finish with this, I can go ahead and do another clay polish that is going to polish those details. Let's undo that and let's remove the mask. And you see we have these really nice details around here where I use the trim dynamic. So this is basically what I did all over this all this body and the rest of the meshes. All right, so that's pretty much it. As you can see, it's very, very simple in terms of the workflow, just so that it is absolutely clear. And I want to make sure that you take this away from this process because, you know, it could be something that you can use in a lot of different objects and a lot of different projects. It doesn't necessarily have to be this pattern. So I'm going to replicate this in just a simple sphere, so just to make sure that you get the workflow right. So I'm going to click on a sphere. I'm going to make it Polymesh 3D. And straight away, I'm going to go ahead and divide this by half like so, maybe a little bit more so it is more precise. There we go. I'm going to hold Control and W to assign a polygroup. So now we have two polygroups. Let's go to the UV master. I want to click on Unwrap. So we now have UVs. And I'm going to go ahead and subdivide this a few times. And then let's go to the surface noise. And let's click on noise. I want to click on alpha. I'm going to load my alpha here. And again, just like I did before, instead of using the 3D, I'm going to use UV because I do have UVs. I'm going to remove the noise or like the mix with basic noise. And that's it. We now have this alpha applied in here. And this is the cool thing about it. You can apply absolutely any alpha that you want. If the alpha is tileable, that is going to work a lot better, but it doesn't necessarily have to be tileable. It's just that if you want to change the size, so alpha scale, then you will notice the different edges. So this alpha is tileable, so that's why I'm going to use this as an example. And in this case, I'm going to use the blend color here so that you know how to use it. So basically, you see that the cracks are actually white because that's what I have selected. So maybe we can mix it up with a bit of redness, maybe not so much red, but like a dark orange. And this is similar to what I have in my final Polypaint. So let's go ahead and also push this strength down quite a bit. Click OK. And now I'm going to store a morph target, right? And that allows me to go back and clean this type of edges. But I'm going to click on Apply to Mesh. So now that I've applied this to mesh, I can go ahead and clean this edge. I'm not going to do that because I already showed you how it's done. And I want to show you a couple more techniques that can actually enhance the effect, right? Or increase the effect. Just because the last thing that I did was to apply the noise into the mesh, that is an action that gets recorded in ZBrush memory. So I can actually use this adjust last to push this, and you see I can adjust how much intensity this is giving me. So this is like another level of control that you can have. So I'm going to undo that, and again I'm going to apply it to mesh so that you can see it now. The noise is applied to the mesh, and I can go ahead and push the adjust last as well. Now I'm going to turn off the noise, and so that I don't visualize that noise, but you see it is a lot stronger. Now for you guys, the adjust last will be under the stroke palette, so you can go to stroke and you'll see it right in there. So this is the adjust last. Now the other thing that I mentioned is that you can use the trim dynamic to trim some of these details so that it goes with the stylization that you want to go for. I think this works really well for this type of creatures, or this specific character, but anything that has like a rock golem or something that has this type of pattern, I think this worked really well. All right, and once you finish with this sort of manual detailing, you can go ahead and click on clay polish. That is going to clean up all those edges and give you something really, really nice. All right, so that is it in terms of the detailing. I'm going to go back to this guy right here, and I'm just going to show you that what I have done in the final render is pretty much the same thing. All I did was to add a bit of Polypaint just to make it a bit more interesting. So the way that I add Polypaint, again, is very, very basic for this type of concept. So I'm going to use, let's use the body as an example. So what I like to do is click on this compute button, which is the AO plugin in ZBrush. So if I click on the C plugin here, we're going to go to the ambient occlusion, and I'm going to click on compute. So you see that's the same button that I have in my UI. So I'm going to click on compute, and that is going to create an ambient occlusion. Is actually going to create a mask of that ambient occlusion. Now I can go ahead and invert that mask, and I'm going to hide it. So I have a custom shortcut to hide the mask, which is Control H. But if you guys don't have that, you can go to masking and you can click on this view mask, right? So I'm just hiding it. I want to select a color like the yellow one, and I'm actually going to go for a darker sort of orange. I'm going to change this to a different brush. So I have a custom brush called the Soft Polypaint brush. This is basically the standard brush with no Z-add or Z-sub and the RGB enable. That's pretty much it. And because I selected a darker color and I have this mask, remember, right? I'm just going to go ahead and start painting like so, maybe with symmetry so it's a little bit faster. And I'm going to start adding some color, right? So that is basically targeting a darker color within those crevices. So that's kind of like step one within this last stage of adding Polypaint. I can clear the mask by clicking Control and drag, and then maybe add something darker around the neck, maybe emphasize this, like the volumes a little bit. So that's all I'm doing right here. So again, it's very, very basic. It doesn't have a lot of, a lot of work, I would say, in terms of adding variation in details. You can spend a lot more time in ZBrush just creating this stylization with the color as well. For me, it kind of like worked well. And another thing that I'm going to show you is that in the final render, you see I have a bunch of noise as well. So it's not just the flat sort of rocks that I have in here. That is because you can also add a bunch of extra noises on top of the one that you applied. So in other words, if you want to add more details to this, you can go to noise. After you apply this, click on noise, go to edit. And this time I'm going to turn this off. I'm going to reduce the intensity because that's quite intense. And let's go ahead and reduce scale, the noise scale. And let's actually go to 3D because that way we can blend it a little bit more. All right, so that's not too bad. We can go ahead and scale that noise, use the strength. So just a little bit of playing around with the sliders. All right, so something like this. And you see the effects and the details that I have here are not as strong as this because you can also play around with the curve. So you do this, let's push this one in and this one up. You can play with the intensity and the profile of these details. All right, something like that. I'm going to increase that noise and reduce the strength to something like this. Click OK. And you see we now have more stuff that we can go ahead and apply to mesh. So now we have something that's not like even or not perfect, and just creates a more of an even surface, right? So that's how I achieve those additional details. All right, so that's pretty much it in terms of the final step. I'm just gonna go ahead and load up the absolute final mesh that I have for the render. And all I did at the end was tweak the pose a little bit. So you see he's a little bit more angry than before. So this is what I had before. I went ahead and pushed the deltoids, the shoulders down a little bit, and his, I tilted his face down, and his eyesight is pointing upwards a little bit. So it's just a little bit of the pose changes, but the rest is exactly the same. All right, so I'm gonna leave this video here, and the final one of this series, I'm gonna show you how quickly you can just export these, put it into Marmoset with some Polypaint, and create a fantastic render in just a few minutes. I'll see you there.